the big build-up. Here we go.
No pressure.
No pressure.
Would either or both of you consider any political measures to try and curb the spiralling property prices on the island, which are doing so much damage to the hopes and aspirations of our younger generation?
And that's, I mean, everyone's asking that question, and I'd love to know the answer. So if there is one.
Yeah, well, thank you very much.
Just
do you want me to stay seated?
The microphone's
First of all, we absolutely recognise that there is a housing crisis at the moment on our island. I think the first thing that government needs to do to address this is pull housing out from its current sheltered existence in the Department for Infrastructure and bring it out into the open. I've suggested and view this as the need to appoint a housing minister or similar to immediately take control of this situation and to work as quickly as possible to deliver the policies to resolve this crisis that we are in. I see that it's likely to be a multitude of policies that are needed, both around identifying how we can more quickly address the housing need on the island, what housing stock we have or new housing we have planned, what brownfield sites are potentially available for us to develop that housing on, what zoned land is available with plans coming up that may be speeded up. But also we need to understand a little bit more about what is actually happening on our island, because a lot of the evidence that we have at the moment is anecdotal. Yes, the build-up of some wealth because of the lockdown periods have enabled people to save more money. That's certainly one element that appears to be driving it. There appears to be quite a lot of emotion involved at the moment about property purchasing and putting money into property for future investment purposes. But also there's evidence, anecdotally at least, that investment firms and investment groups are coming together to buy large swathes of property on our island. You know, if that is the case, if the evidence is there to support that, and we do need that evidence because at the moment we can't necessarily, haven't been able to pull that out, but if that is there, then I think yes, we do need to bring legislative measures in that may need to control who is actually buying property on this island, and then we also need to think about what sort of structures in terms of first-time buyers and affordable housing also need to be put in place.
Okay. So when you're talking about housing crisis, there's many different aspects of that. I think one of the first things to think about is homelessness. So on the Isle of Man, we don't have a statutory responsibility to house homeless people. We did that during the pandemic. We actually invested in finding those homeless people, but through liaison with GRI, and actually providing them with temporary accommodation for a while. And then they were given the support that they needed, hopefully to find access to supported housing afterwards. And that actually really made a difference to that small number of people on the island who are homeless. But there's a far larger number, particularly young people, whether they be called sofa surfers or they're just going from one place to another, who need housing. We also know that homeless people, they're disproportionately victims of domestic abuse. So we know that there's been a rise in domestic abuse. We know that people have had to leave their family homes due to it. We should be making a deliberate attempt to house them. So in terms of legislation, I think that's the first thing to deal with the crux of the problem. In terms of affordable housing, I think we need to break with the preconception that everyone wants to buy their own home, or everyone could at some point. We need to make sure that the rental sector is also affordable, accessible and of a good quality. Now, the Landlord Registration Act that was passed is the first step towards trying to do that, but actually needs to be expanded more in terms of minimum standards, protections both for landlords and tenants through tenancy agreements, and a deposit guarantee scheme. And also we need to make sure that those same standards that are asked of private landlords are asked of public landlords. Because we know that in certain areas, the public realm, social housing, is substandard and needs significant investment. At the end of the day, with affordable housing, we need to build more homes, or we need to free up more homes to occupancy. So one of the things with the last census was exactly how many empty homes are there out there. We don't know. You can do census and people might be away. Manx utilities have tried to look at electricity usage, but we're not quite sure. But going door to door, there are some very large empty houses lying there, which in modern day designs, you probably put 2 or 3 houses on the same plot. So why can't we harness some of that? I think we need to work very closely with local authorities to make sure that they can build social housing, to make sure that the tenancies actually free up that social housing when people are ready to move on, but also to break some of the logjams whereby people who are renting are paying so much in rent they can't save for a deposit. They are trapped in rental accommodation. And you can do that in many ways, but one of the DOI recommendations was to have a mid-rent scheme so that people could go into a house or a flat. They'd be charged 2/3 of the market rate and would be given the ability to save for a mortgage. With the Manx Development Corporation, which was established, there's a huge potential there using private initiative but a public-private partnership to do things like rent-to-buy schemes that don't exist at the moment, to actually create the right circumstances whereby we can have subsidised housing for key workers who can then come over to this island, put some roots down and then move on to the next step. As Alpha said, there are anecdotal stories of people from across buying large numbers of houses and therefore skewing the housing market. If that's correct, we need to act on that in the way that other jurisdictions have had to do so, particularly Canada and New Zealand, where they've brought in taxes for those people who are trying to buy. But we also need to deal with those people who live on the island, who for all the right will in the world are buying to let because that's their pension plan. We shouldn't necessarily penalise them, but we need to get that balance right. And I would like to see some efforts from the developers to ensure that new houses that are built are actually for owner occupation. New houses are homes, not an investment for other people.
Okay. So, and you happy with that? Do you want to go back for another? Always feel free to go back for another go if you want to. When the microphone comes to you, are you happy with that? You're happy with that? Well, I just want to chirp in a bit. A minister for housing, do you say? Is that going to be a new minister, a new position, another?
Well, I think a government needs to set out its intentions early. This is a crisis, and people need the confidence that it is being tackled. And they also need accountability around who is actually tackling that crisis. And I think whether it's the chairman or whether it's a minister or whether it is a chairman, this absolutely, my commitment is to pull this out of the DOI as soon as possible, because at the moment, our policies and strategies around housing, I'm sorry, are just not good enough. We need more public transparency about this, and you're going to need to know what steps we're actively taking to deliver and resolve this crisis. And as I said, it's quite a holistic approach. It does cover many areas, but we also need action. And I talked about my open remarks about a government that is intent on delivery, and that's why, Paul, I firmly believe that actually pulling this out, giving somebody the responsibility to get on and deliver is a major step forward.
You'd have a minister or not?
In my document, I talk about having deputy ministers, rather than swelling Combing or messing around with the ministerial arrangements we've got at the moment, because we need to hit the ground running. We need to do things relatively quickly. And one of my worries is if we spend too much time as a government nasal gazing, rearranging everything, different departments go, different responsibilities go elsewhere, we won't get the outcomes we need. So we've got 11 new members. People with ministerial experience are an endangered species on the Isle of Man in terms of government. So we need to harness some of that new energy. So one of my ideas would be to have a deputy minister who would be brought in to do a particular job. And I think in terms of housing, I agree with Alf. You need somebody to take responsibility for that, but actually to link that to planning reform as well, because they're intimately entwined. We need that deputy minister to be actually be able to develop the skills so that when we have a reshuffle, they can go into being a minister. So they would answer the questions, they would lead that agenda, and hopefully take things forward.
Okay, thank you. Next question, please.